gospel lectionary from the day inside us of our familiar text. You all heard it most of your lives, and I'll read to you this portion of it as we find it in the Gospel of St. Luke, chapter 9, beginning with verse 28, reading to verse 36. All right, here are the words that we find there. About 8 days after Jesus said this, that is, Jesus had talked to his apostles about his impending death. About 8 days after Jesus had said this, he took Peter, John, and James with him and went up into the mountain to pray. As he was praying, the appearance of his face changed and his clothes became as bright as a flash of lightning. 2 men, Moses and Elijah, appeared in gracious splendor, talking with Jesus. They spake about his departure, which he was about to bring to fulfillment in Jerusalem. Peter and his companions were very sleepy. When they became fully awake, they saw his glory and the 2 men standing with him. As the men were leaving Jesus, Peter said to him, "Master, it is good for us to be here. Let us put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." He didn't know what he was talking about. While he was speaking, a cloud appeared and enveloped them, and they were afraid as they entered the cloud. A voice came from the cloud saying, "This is my Son whom I have chosen. Listen to him." When the voice had spoken, they found that Jesus was alone. The disciples kept this to themselves and told no one at the time what they had seen. I imagine a pretty good reason for them not telling people what they heard and seen, since it was a fantastic event. I always liked this story when I was going to Sunday school as a child. I grew up in the comic book age. We read Superman and Green Lantern, Submarina, Batman, and all those comic book stories. When I heard this story in Sunday school, I really was attracted to it because it had everything. I mean, here is Jesus glowing like he had just drunk a radiation cocktail or something, you know. And here is, 2 kind of ghostly-like figures who show up on each side of him. And then there's a cloud that moves in, and a voice speaking from the cloud. I mean, it just has all the drama that I had been reading in the comic books. And so I really was drawn to the story. Now, you read the story and you hear it read, and you just sit there as if, well, it's a transfiguration. That's what transfigurations are. But it's not that simple. I mean, try to imagine, for instance, that you have a good friend who seems to be exceptionally pious, more religious than some of the other friends, and you've been drawn to that friend, so you follow him around a bit, and one day his friend says to 2 or 3 of you, he says, I feel the need to meditate. I'm going over on Church Hill and overlook the city, and I want to pray. So you say, "Sure, we'll go with you." And you all go up and you're looking down in the Chaco Valley, and you're looking at your friend, and all of a sudden he gets to glow. And you say, "What is going on here?" And then there are 2 figures, Mother Teresa on one side and Billy Graham on the other side. so afraid to fall on your face. What was really complicated, and you didn't get this in the account that we read in Luke, but the story is told in Matthew and in Mark. And in Matthew and Mark, it says that Jesus told them not to tell anybody about this experience until after his resurrection. And so, goodness, here you are with this fantastic experience on the mountaintop. And you can't tell anybody about it for, we don't know, maybe a year was it? We don't know exactly how long it was between this experience and the death and resurrection of Christ. So what a story this is, and what are we to make of it? I think most of you know, maybe you don't, but I'm telling you now, that it was about 40 years after Jesus' death and resurrection that anybody wrote anything down about his life. They told stories. There were stories, many, many stories that people had to tell about what Jesus said, what Jesus did. But they were all oral. And obviously, as they told them, things would be added, a little bit of difference here. Luke has about 5 or 6 different points that are not made when the other two writers, Matthew and Mark, tell the same story. But finally, around 70 A.D., the first writer, Mark, from whom Luke will probably have seen a copy of what Mark wrote, so he added things that he had heard. They put all these things down. Why is it, I ask, and maybe you ask too, why is it that when many things are left out of one writer, included by the other, why is it that all 3 of the gospel writers, John does not have any record of this at all, but Matthew, Mark, and Luke all tell the story of this event, the Transfiguration. And it's called the Transfiguration. That's not in the text. It's called Transfiguration by later scholars. And what they're saying is that the transformation took place in the life of Jesus and in the life of those who witnessed this event. Why is it that all 3 of these gospel writers felt it absolutely necessary to include this story in the book? I think the answer is that Christianity had rapidly spread between the death and resurrection of Christ. It had spread all the way from Jerusalem across the Mediterranean Sea to the capital of the great Roman Empire, 3.5 million square miles, 60 million people in that vast empire. And Christianity had spread widely in that empire. And these people had met many different religious leaders. They had bumped into many different kinds of religion. And so the question was, how could they get across to people that the one leader was the one that they ought to listen to? And this story underscores that. For the Jewish people, the great lawgiver was Moses. Moses, who had gone up a mountain himself and had come down with laws for the morals of the Jewish people. I don't know if I really have to reject this, but maybe you saw, what is it, Non Secretor? It's a comic strip. Do you read Non Secretor in papers these days? Well, there was I think it was Thursday. It showed Moses standing in front of his garage door with an old wagon sitting in the garage, and the snow was piled 2 and 3 feet high, and Moses was out in his driveway with his hands up, and just like he parted the Red Seas, he parted the snow in his driveway. And the caption of the story said, who was the prince of the prophets in the Old Testament, the man who was the great spokesman for God to the ancient Hebrew people. And so here was the great lawgiver, here was the great premier prophet, and in the middle Jesus, and then comes the cloud. And the voice out of the cloud says, in effect, didn't say all of this, but in effect what it says is that Moses has led us, Elijah has led us, but now I want everybody to listen to the one whom I have chosen to represent me fully on earth, my chosen one, my son, Jesus. Who could miss that point? I'm sure that once Peter, James, and John got their wits about them, and after the resurrection, they could tell people many things before that, but they could, after the resurrection, they could tell them what happened on that mountain. But now, listen again to what the voice from the cloud said, and you get something that you can take home with you today. This is my beloved Son. This is my chosen one. Listen to him. All right, well now, let's all of us, let's listen to Jesus. And if we listen to him, what do we hear him saying? Well, we hear him say a lot of things recorded in the Gospels. We hear him saying, I am the way, the truth, and the life. You come to God through me. You hear him saying that I am the door, and if you want to enter into the peace of God, go through this door. You hear him say, I am the bread of life, and if you eat this bread, you will live. You hear him say, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me, though he were dead, yet shall he live. And he that lives and believes in me shall never truly die. These are some of the things you hear him say. Or when the puzzled questioner comes to him and says, Lord, I'm confused. I know all the rules. I know the Ten Commandments. I know all the spin-offs from the Ten Commandments. There's so many rules and regulations and laws. What is really vital? What is it we need to know in order to serve and please God? And Jesus said, it's fairly simple. Love God with all your heart, your soul, your mind, your strength, and love your neighbor as you love yourself. These are just a few, just a handful of the things that you need to listen to, you need to hear when Jesus speaks. But I think, for the most part, we hear Jesus in the stories that he told. In fact, you get one almost right away when he said to the man who asked him, what's a simple truth for one to be in harmony with God? Love your neighbors, you love yourself. Somebody asked him, in fact, it was the same fellow who asked him to simplify what it meant to be a servant of God. Jesus gave that answer. The man said, well, who is my neighbor? And then Jesus told one of those marvelous stories that he was so good at telling as a way of illustrating moral and spiritual truths that are so vital for our lives. And he told a story about the Good Samaritan, about the Jew who had been robbed and beaten along the road, how his fellow Jews, important people, the clergy, the priests, the college professors, the theological leaders passed him by, and then came this despised alien who stopped by to risk his own safety, his own life, and minister to the needs of that person. So you want to know who the neighbor is? Really pull the switch on him. He says the neighbor is not so much the guy who needed the help, the neighbor is the guy who gives the help. It's a guy who risks things. A guy who gambles with his Christianity in order to enlighten people and strengthen the whole fabric of the community of God in the world. Or, what's God really like? Jesus tells another story. Tells a story about a man who had a son. In fact, he had two sons, but one of the sons became more difficult to manage than the other son. But that son left home and went off and got into trouble and became poverty-stricken. Finally came back home, and you know how would like the story. We would say he came back, his father gave him a stern lecture and says, "You do that again, that's it for you." None of that, none of that. Father opened his arms, welcomed the errant son back, clasped him, and threw a big party to welcome him home. And Jesus said, and that's God. That's what God's like. Or, you want to know what your response to that kind of grace should be? Well, Jesus tells another story. This time it's a story of the Last Judgment. The Last Judgment. And here are people on either side of Christ the Judge. And he tells them that I was hungry and gave me some food. I was thirsty, he gave me something to drink. I didn't have any clothes, and gave me some clothes to wear. I was a stranger and you took me in. I was a prisoner and you visited me and comforted me. Inasmuch as you do this to any other person, you do it to me. And that's our response. Giving our lives, doing whatever is necessary, stepping out and putting ourselves out for the sake of the people around us. I've never had any dramatic experience like these three apostles. I suppose that's why George Crawley's hymn means so much to me when he says, "I ask no dream, no prophet ecstasy, no sudden rending of this veil of clay, no angel visited, no opening skies, but take the dimness of my soul away." Or the great last line, the last stanza of that song, "Teach me to love thee as thine angels love." One holy passion, filling all my frame, the kindling of a heavenly dove, my heart an altar, thy love the flame. Well, whatever mountaintops you have experienced, if when you come to church, music such as we've heard this morning, both by Carol on the piano, or the choir by your congregational singing, taking the bread and the wine and thinking of Christ in a new way, resolving to put yourself at God's disposal that you've never done before in your life, whatever it is, go and do it enthusiastically. Come down from the mountain of experience and get out where the real people are. In their homes, in the streets, in the stores. Make the love of Christ known through your words and your lives. That's the